Okay, we are on page 48 of the syllabus, and we finished the prophet Hosea, and in 2 Kings 14, 28 and 29. This will be the end of Jeroboam II. That's the end of Jeroboam, all that he did in his might, how he fought, how he recovered for Israel. Damascus and Hamath, remember, he was the savior. He was the one who was going to bring back their original geographic territory. And that's what it's noting right here. Which had belonged to Judah. They not written about the Chronicles of the kings of Israel. And Jeroboam slept with his fathers, even with the kings of Israel. And Zechariah, his son, became king in his place. Zechariah is going to be king number 15. And you can note the points to remember there. The prosperity of Uzziah is noted on the other side. Elath is built. He's very successful in war, very successful in building more fortifications. His army is noted, and his fame is noted. And that's all found in 2 Chronicles 26, as you note in your outline. What we're going to do is come down to Zechariah as king number 15, and already I noted this for you earlier, that these last 6 kings of Israel, only 2 of them are going to die a natural death. They're going to be assassinated. They're not going to last very long. And so in 2 Kings 14, the latter part of verse 29 says, Zechariah's son became king in his place. 2 Kings 15, verse 8, in the 38th year of Azariah, that's the same as Uzziah, king of Judah, Zechariah, the son of Jeroboam, became king over Israel and Samaria for 6 months. His character is noted in verse 9. Don't even have to read it. We know exactly what it's going to say. He did even the sign of the Lord as his fathers had done. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin. And then it notes very quickly in verses 10 to 11, he dies. So we got through that guy pretty fast. Then Shallum, the son of Jabesh, conspired against him, struck him before the people. He does it in public, and killed him and reigned in his place. Now the rest of the acts of Zechariah, behold, they're written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel. Well, whatever he was able to accomplish in 6 months, and the Lord just doesn't think that's worthy of recording within the inspired word, so there's nothing said. And then in 2 Kings 15, verse 12, you'll note at the bottom of the syllabus it says, the Lord's promise to Jehu is fulfilled. It says, this is the word of the Lord, and that cross-reference that with 2 Kings 10, verse 30. This is the word of the Lord which he spoke to Jehu, saying, your sons to the 4th generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. And so it was. And so that's the fulfillment of 2 Kings 10 and verse 30. And then we come to the next page of the syllabus, page 49. And the points to remember in Zechariah's reign, not much. His reign is just 6 months long. It's not noted there, but that's what it should be. He's slain by Shallum. Now Shallum comes along. He's king number 16. Look how long he reigns. 30 days.
1 month.
2 Kings 15, verse 13. Shallum, the son of Jabesh, became king in the 39th year of Uzziah, king of Judah. He reigned 1 month in Samaria. And then verses 14, 15, he's gone. Then Menahem, son of Gadi, went up from Tirzah, and Tirzah's east of Samaria, came to Samaria and struck Shallum, the son of Jabesh, in Samaria, killed him, became king in his place. Now the rest of the acts of Shallum and his conspiracy which he made, behold, they're written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel. And that's it. That's all we've got concerning him.
Aren't these guys afraid to be king?
Yeah, I would think, but they think when they go in probably that they got all sorts of power and all sorts of people backing them up, but it isn't true. they get wiped out just as quickly as they wiped out. Well, actually, he didn't last as long as the king before him. He just lasts 1 month. So this is really the beginning of a period of anarchy. This is all in the 39th year of Uzziah, as you can see on your outline. So we come to king number 17. This means we've just got 3 left. 17, he comes to the throne, 2 Kings 15, verses 16 and 17. Then Menahem struck Tipsha, and all who were in it, this borders from Tirzah, because they did not, let's see, 15, 16, and 17. Well, that's what he does when he comes to the throne. Because they did not open to him, therefore he struck it and ripped up all its women who were with child. Real nice guy. Verse 17, 39th year of Azariah, that's Uzziah, king of Judah. Menahem, son of Gedi, became king over Israel. Reigned 10 years. So he gets to reign at least 10 years in Samaria. But verse 18 notes his character. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, did not depart all his days from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin. And you'll note as a subpoint C in your outline that there's a reign of a fellow by the name of Pekah. We're going to see him later in this lineage in Gilead. So it seems to be, Pekah seems to be ruling as a king in Gilead during the reign of Menahem. And you can go back to Hosea 5 and verse 5 and just note that reference Israel and Ephraim. Israel and Ephraim are one and the same. But over on the Judah side, as you travel south, we have to go back into 2nd Chronicles to see what's happening with Uzziah during this time. In 2nd Chronicles 26, beginning with verse 16, this is the Messianic line, you remember. And we're going to see that Uzziah, we've already noted that he did a whole lot of building. He was successful in war. He had a great army, great fame. That's in the first part of 2 Chronicles 26. We just didn't read it. But as a result of this, we're going to see his sin. And you'll be able to identify his sin. His sin is found in verses 16 through 19a. When he became strong, his heart was so, there's the word, proud, that he acted corruptly. So pride got a hold of him. He was unfaithful to the Lord his God, for he entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Well, he has no right to be in, that's the holy place. But he would be going to the altar of incense, which lies in front of the veil that leads into the Holy of Holies. Then Azariah the priest entered after him, and with him 80 priests of the Lord, valiant men. So they come in really to get him out of there. And they opposed Uzziah the king and said to him, "It is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who are consecrated to burn incense. Get out of the sanctuary, for you have been unfaithful, will have no honor from the Lord your God." So that's a threat that is a valid threat made by Azariah, who is the high priest at that particular time, that he needs to get out of there. But Uzziah, with a censer in his hand for burning incense, was enraged. And while he was enraged with the priest, the leprosy broke out on his forehead before the priests in the house of the Lord, beside the altar of incense. Now, keep in mind that any leprosy that would even be brought into the temple complex would require the whole temple complex to be cleansed. So here he's not only brought this upon himself, but he's also brought about a desecration of the temple complex as a result of what he has done right here. Then it goes on to note his punishment, of course, in 19b through 21a. And Azariah, the chief priest, this is verse 20, looked at him, and behold, he was leprous on his forehead, and they hurried him out of there. He himself also hastened to get out because the Lord had smitten him. So the idea is that if he's already leprous on the forehead, that scares him because he could be leprous all over his body. So the Lord goes after his forehead to begin with, and of course that would be the most visible part of any individual, because you would be covered with clothing of the rest, and perhaps even have a turban on, but your face would always be visible to anyone else. So having it on the forehead, it would be visible. And he didn't get this on his right knee, which would be covered, or his left knee. Got it on his forehead. And so they hurried him out of there because he's desecrated the temple, and he hurries out of there because the Lord has smitten him. And it goes on to note in verse 21, King Uzziah was a leper to the day of his death. He lived in a separate house, being a leper, for he was cut off from the house of the Lord. Jotham, his son, was over the king's house, judging the people of the land. Now, you say, well, wouldn't that leprosy just attack the rest of the body, and would he just eventually waste away? No. This could be a leprosy from God that's just going to be visible on the forehead of the individual. That's enough to make him excluded from any kind of society. And it could be that it doesn't go any further than that. God just wants him to know you got leprosy. He wants everybody else to know that he's got leprosy. And so he could live in seclusion and not fail in health at all. But he can't come out. That leprosy is not going to disappear. And so his punishment is taking place. So that will bring in 2 Chronicles 21 verse B, in 2 Chronicles 26 and verse 21b, says, and Jotham, his son, was over the king's house, judging the people of the land. So Jotham is going to be co-regent. But Uzziah is going to live for 12 more years. So 12 more years of seclusion. You can't be around people. And so we go on to, we skip over a bunch of Isaiah sections right here. We go on to actually 57. We'll come back to the Isaiah sections in a moment, or at least by next class period. So this is page 57 of your outline. And it starts out with 2 Kings 15, verses 19 and 20, going back to Israel. It says, Pul, king of Assyria, came up against the land. Menahem gave Pul 1,000 talents of silver. I think we'd already looked at that anyway. And Menahem exacted the money from Israel, even from all the mighty men of wealth, from each man 50 shekels of silver, to pay the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria returned, did not remain there in the land. So he's come into the land, and that's Tiglath-Pileser III who's come into the land, and he's been bought off. And then Menahem's going to die. 2 Kings 15, verse 21. Now the rest of the acts of Menahem and all that he did, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? And Menahem slept with his fathers, and Pekahiah, his son, became king in his place. So Pekahiah is going to be king. And we've already noted that Pekah is probably king in another part of the land at the same time. But Pekahiah is going to reign for 2 years. And he comes to the throne, 2 Kings 15, verse 22b. Pekahiah, his son, became king in his place. Verse 24 gives you his character. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin. And he is reigning And Pekah is also reigning. Pekah will reign during the whole reign of Pekahiah. We'll see him down here in a minute as king number 19. And then we have Pekahiah's death in 2 Kings 15, verses 25 and 26. Just 2 years. Very insignificant as far as God's concerned, because he doesn't say anything about it. And Pekah, son of Remaliah, his officer, conspired against him, struck him in Samaria, in the castle of the king's house, with Argob and Ariah. How would you like the name Argob? And with him were 50 men of the Gileadites. I don't imagine anybody here is going to name their newborn son Argob. Who would name him Argob?
Nobody would name it.
I'm going to suggest it to Naomi.
Just as a joke for the kid to bear for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Better than Sue.
Not only do you have bushy eyebrows, but your name is Argob. Just
You don't want to give that kid a chance, do you?
mark for life.
I want to hear this recording later.
Well, anyway, I'm sure that Argob's mother loved him.
What verse was that about Argo?
Verse 25. Yeah, 2 Kings 15. So Argob and Ariah, with them were 15 men of the Gileadites, and he killed him and became king in his place. He's already been reigning in Gilead, and so now he's come from Gilead to Samaria, and he said it's just time to take over from all of these folks. And so that's what he does. So that's the death of Pekahiah. So verse 26 says, the rest of the acts of Pekahiah and all that he did is behold, they're written in the book of Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. Again, that book is lost, just like the same book for the kings of Judah is lost. It'd be interesting to find some of that, but it's not a part of the inspired text. So points to remember in Pekahiah's reign, he's evil and he dies violently. We're not surprised. And then we come to Pekah, who's already been reigning. Now, this is going to be at the beginning of Isaiah's reign. You'll note over there under Judah, it notes the prophet Isaiah. We'll come back to that. We'll go ahead and run through these kings to get rid of them, and then we'll come back. We're going to get down into Hezekiah's reign, Ahaz and Hezekiah's reign, when we come back to Isaiah. So Pekah is coming along. He'll reign 20 years. There's a 12-year overlap where he's already been king over in Gilead. And then he's going to be king for 8 years only as the only king. And that will make 20 years total. So here he comes, 2 Kings 15, verse 27, 52nd year of Azariah, that's Uzziah. See, Uzziah is still seen as king, but he's off in seclusion. He's in his house. His son is reigning in his place, Jotham, but he can't get out of his house. So in 2 Kings 15, verse 27, Pekah, son of Remaliah, became king over Israel and Samaria, reigned 20 years. But that 20 years includes that time that he was over in Gilead. His character, 2 Kings 15, 28, he did evil in the sight of the Lord, did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin.
They're all going to say that for Israel kings, aren't they? Because
Every single one.
they're in the good one.
They're in the good one in the bottom. 20 bad ones. So we come to Uzziah's death. Remember that he's been living as a leper in seclusion. So 2 Kings 15, verse 6 and 7. Now the rest of the acts of Azariah, that's Uzziah, and all that he did, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Azariah slept with his fathers, and they buried him with his fathers in the city of David. And Jotham, his son, became king in his place. He's been reigning as a co-regent, but now he's going to reign as the only king And Uzziah, the point to remember was that he started out doing good, and then pride led to his downfall, and that pride caused him to contract leprosy miraculously from God. Just bang, there it was on his forehead. And of course, he would wish from that point on that he'd never walked into the temple. So we come to king number 11 of Judah. That's Jotham. 7 years of an overlap and 9 years as sole king. He's going to go 16 years total. And he comes to the throne, 2 Kings 15, verse 7b, that we've already noted. Jotham, his son, became king in his place. And then in verses 32 and 33, in the 2nd year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, became king. He was 25 years old and became king. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok. Then his character is found in 1534. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord. He did according to all that his father Uzziah did. Now, that doesn't take into account Uzziah becoming prideful and contracting leprosy. But Uzziah is considered to be a good king in a moment of, I guess, a moment of stupidity. Oh, someone of you wrote on one of your papers, you were trying to refer to the Mormons, but you misspelled it and said morons. So I wrote on the paper, I didn't know there was a cult of stupid people.
Well,
That just reminded me of so you really, I mean, spell check won't pick that up. Even if you try to say Mormons and you say morons, you know, it's going to pick it up. And I thought there was a little bit of, you know, there is sort of a connection. Morons, Mormons.
Right here, Brother Dave.
That was DeAndre.
So Uzziah was a good king, and when we're looking at Jotham, we're going to see that he's also a good king. The spiritual condition of Judah, though, this is when Isaiah is really going to start his work. Spiritual condition of Judah is not too good. In verse 35a, only the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. And then it's going to note, this is in the 2nd year of Pekah, king of Israel. So we come to, we're going to have to do Micah also. We'll come back to that. We come to, okay. So this takes us down to page 61 of the syllabus. And this is going to be Jotham's building, 2 Kings 15, verse 35. It says, he built the upper gate of the house of the Lord. And it's during this time, we won't go into it, but the Ammonites are overthrown. Remember, they are directly, they're not directly east of the southern kingdom of Judah. They're more directly east of the northern kingdom of Israel. But the Ammonites are overthrown during this time. And you'll note over on the Israel side, here on this page of the syllabus, the real beginning of the Assyrian difficulties. And so let's go on over to 1 Chronicles. 1 Chronicles 5. And this is what we're going to pick up when we get into the book of Isaiah. 1 Chronicles 5, and looking at verse 25. That's not right. continue on. This is the sons of Reuben. Let's go back over the Second Chronicles. Let's go back to the Second Chronicles in the 27 and 28 section.
Before David Jotham,
Pardon me?
who we starting with in Second Chronicles?
Well, we're looking for this section that talks about the Assyrian difficulties. And I've got First Chronicles 5 down there, and that's not right. Let me see if I can figure this out real quick. What we're going to be dealing with is a war that's called the Syro-Ephraimitic War. And you might note, let's go to Second Chronicles 28. We are dealing with Jotham. Second Chronicles 27 is dealing with Jotham. We'll just go back and put a marker on that, get that straightened around for you. So we're looking at Jotham in Second Chronicles
27:5 talks about it.
Pardon me?
27:5 for Second Chronicles.
Yeah. There's the Ammonite problem. That's what we're looking at subpoint E under Jotham there. Second Chronicles 27:5 and 6. Says he fought with the king of the Ammonites and prevailed over them, so that the Ammonites gave him during that year 100 talents of silver, 10,000 cores of wheat, 10,000 of barley. The Ammonites also paid this amount in the second and the third year, so there's 3 years that they're going to be paying up. Verse 6 says, so Jotham became mighty because he ordered his ways before the Lord his God. And that's an interesting statement concerning Jotham, because that indicates that he was right before God, and he became mighty. In other words, God blesses Jotham as a result of his ways before the Lord. But then it's going to just very quickly end with Jotham. 2 Kings, let's go back to 2 Kings 15. I'll get the rest of that straightened out for you. 2 Kings 15 and verse 37. In those days the Lord began to send Rezin, king of Aram, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, against Judah. So when you look at the alliance of Syria and Israel, you've got the two kings noted there. And one is the king of Israel, and the other is the king of Syria. So this is called the Syro-Ephraimitic War. Syro being for Syria, Ephraimitic being for Israel. Remember that another name for Israel is Ephraim. So when you're looking at, it says in 2 Kings 15:37, it says, in those days the Lord began to send. So that's coming against Judah, and it's alliance between Rezin, king of Syria, see, king of Aram, and Pekah, who is the son of Remaliah, who is the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. So this is the beginning of the Syro-Ephraimitic War.
Why is the Lord sending
Why would you think?
sending them against Judah?
Why?
Well, they weren't being faithful at that time.
That's right. So it's another woodshed moment, isn't it? Yeah. So he's going to use them to discipline. Now, it's up to the king of Judah to go to God and ask for help in dealing with Rezin, king of Aram, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah. But he's not going to do that. Now, while Jotham is still alive, as 2 Kings 16, coming down in your outline on that, on page 61, coming down the left side of the outline, it says Ahaz becomes king while Jotham is still alive. 2 Kings 16, verses 1 and 2. In the 17th year of Pekah, son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, became king. And then it goes on to say that Ahaz was 20 years old and became king. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his father David had done. And then you'll note as you come down to verse 3, just still looking at that particular thought, even though it doesn't show it in the outline, it says, but he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, even made his son pass through the fire, that's child sacrifice, according to the abomination of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel. So that's Ahaz. So Ahaz becomes king while Jotham is still alive. And then if you'll come down and you'll note 2 Kings 16 and verse 5, here's your Syro-Ephraimitic War. Ahaz has now become king. It's a co-regency. We don't know why Jotham is, maybe he's in failing health or something. But in 2 Kings 16 and verse 5 it says, then Rezin, king of Aram, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to wage war, and they besieged Ahaz, but could not overcome him. So they're going to come up, and they're going to try to take Jerusalem, and they're going to give Ahaz a great deal of difficulty. Now, Ahaz is not going to seek help from God. We've already determined in the scripture that he's not a good king. So if you come down to 2 Chronicles 28, staying within the outline, you'll note Oded the prophet. 2 Chronicles 28. And Oded the prophet is going to have something to say at this particular time. 2 Chronicles 28, beginning with verse 9. But a prophet of the Lord was there, whose name was Oded. He went out to meet the army which came to Samaria and said to them, behold, because the Lord, the God of your fathers, was angry with Judah, he has delivered them into your hand. You have slain them in a rage which has even reached heaven. And now you are proposing to subjugate for yourselves the people of Judah and Jerusalem for male and female slaves. Surely do you not have transgressions of your own against the Lord your God? In other words, why are you going to make even more sins? Why are you going to add sin to sin? Verse 11, he then says, now therefore listen to me and return the captives whom you captured from your brothers, for the burning anger of the Lord is against you. Then some of the heads of the sons of Ephraim, Azariah the son of Johanan, Berechiah the son of Meshillemoth, Jehezekiah the son of Shallum, and Amasa the son of Hadlai, arose against those who were coming from the battle. He said to them, you must not bring the captives in here, for you are proposing to bring upon us guilt against the Lord, adding to our sins and our guilt, for our guilt is great, so that his burning anger is against Israel. So Oded has prophesied from God concerning the release of the Jewish captives. So the armed men left the captives and the spoil before the officers and all the assembly. Then the men who were designated by name arose, took the captives, and they clothed all their naked ones from the spoil. They gave them clothes and sandals, fed them, gave them drink, anointed them with oil, led all their feeble ones on donkeys, and brought them to Jericho, the city of palm trees, to their brothers. Then they returned to Samaria. So Oded has made quite an impression on the northern kingdom of Israel, who had already come into the land during the reign of Ahaz and had captured a number of people from Judah. And then on top of that, we have in 2 Chronicles 28, verses 17 through 19, Judah is not only going to have problems from the northern kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Syria in this Syro-Ephraimitic war, and this is God's way of saying, you people need to get yourselves straightened out. This is during the time of Ahaz. And Ahaz is leading the people in a very quick movement in the wrong direction. So God brings up the Edomites and the Philistines. In 2 Chronicles 28, verses 17 through 19, for again the Edomites had come and attacked Judah. Remember, we have a whole minor prophet who prophesies concerning the Edomites. Who is that? Obadiah. All I say is unbrotherly conduct, and you ought to pick that up. For again, the Edomites had come and attacked Judah and carried away captives. The Philistines also had invaded the cities of the lowland and of the Negev of Judah, had taken Beth-Shemesh, Ajalon, Gederah, and Soko with its villages, Timnah with its villages, and Gimzo with its villages, and they settled there. For the Lord humbled Judah. Donnie, here we go. Same thought. For the Lord humbled Judah because of Ahaz, king of Israel. So Ahaz is the reason that they're getting these woodshed moments. For he had brought about a lack of restraint in Judah and was very unfaithful to the Lord. So this is why this is happening. You've got the northern kingdom of Israel giving you problems. You've got the kingdom of Syria giving you problems. Those two are allied together. And now you got the Philistines giving you problems, and you got the Edomites giving you problems.
I guess earlier on I'd read something, thought I was under the impression that God didn't want Judah and Israel, the brothers, to fight.
That's right.
But now he's bringing Israel on Judah.
Yeah, he's using them in a disciplinary fashion. Yeah.
So earlier he didn't want to fight, but now he's telling them.
But now he's going to use them.
Okay.
Yeah. So Ahaz, instead of going to God, look at 2 Chronicles 28, in verse 16. Ahaz, instead of going to God, goes to Assyria. Now, don't get those mixed up. I read one of your somebody in the class today in one of their either in one of their sermons or in one of their bulletin articles got Syria mixed up with Assyria. It's easy to do. Just keep it in your mind that those are two distinctly different nations. So he's having problems with Syria. So in 2 Chronicles 28:16, at that time, King Ahaz sent to the kings of Assyria for help. And then in verse 21 it says, and Ahaz took a portion out of the house of the Lord and out of the palace of the king and of the princes, and gave it to the king of Assyria, but it did not help him. So he seeks help from Assyria, but it's going to be of no avail. Now, Ahaz is going to be called on this one, and so I'm going to pull you over to Isaiah, and this is where, in Isaiah, the 7th chapter, this is where God, through Isaiah, calls out Ahaz. So turn over to Isaiah 7, beginning with verse 1. Isaiah will be raised up. If you look at Isaiah chapter 1, it says the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz, concerning Judah and Jerusalem, which he saw during the reigns of Uzziah. That was the one that became a leper. Jotham, Ahaz. Now Jotham, who follows after Uzziah, is going to be a good king, but his son Ahaz is not. And Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Now you notice that in Isaiah 1 verse 1, there's no indication of the northern kingdom of Israel. Although he's going to be dealing with problems that are caused by the northern kingdom of Israel, Isaiah's primary message is for Judah. And it's just like God has now just cut Israel off. There's just not going to be anything more said to northern kingdom of Israel. Now, during this time, we also find that there's a minor prophet who's prophesying. And his name is Micah. So Micah is contemporary with Isaiah, all written around the same time. And Micah is going to be dealing, well, let's turn over to Micah and see what's noted in the superscription of Micah. So it says in Micah 1 verse 1, the word of the Lord which came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of Jotham. So it doesn't start with Uzziah. In the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. Now the kings of Israel will not be noted. But it does say in Micah that some of the message is for the northern kingdom of Israel. But God is just withdrawing his prophets from the northern kingdom of Israel. They're doomed. They're in a headlong rush to destruction. So coming back to Isaiah 7, it says, now it came about in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Aram, we've already noted in 2 Kings 15, verse 37, that this alliance of the northern kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Syria is brought about by God's intervention. He's using them. The reason the king of Aram and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to wage war against it, but could not conquer it. When it was reported in the house of David, saying, the Arameans, that would be the Syrians, have camped in Ephraim. Ephraim is the territory where we find the northern kingdom of Israel. Remember, Ephraim is a synonymous term with the northern kingdom of Israel. So what we're looking at is for the king of Judah, who is Ahaz, going back to verse 1, he has a report brought to him that this army, including the Arameans, they've camped in Ephraim. Well, Ephraim would be northern kingdom of Israel. Arameans would be Syria. So this is the allied force of Israelites and Syrians. This is the Syro-Ephraimitic war. So it's bad enough trying to take a stand against the northern kingdom of Israel. Now I've got to contend with an alliance between Syria and the northern kingdom of Israel. His heart and the hearts of the people shook as the trees of the forest shake with the wind. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, go out now to meet Ahaz, you and your son Shir-Jashub, Now, Shir Jashub means a remnant shall return. So his son has been given this name in consideration of the fact that both Israel and Judah will return from the captivity they go into. So every time you see this son of Isaiah, his name means a remnant shall return. So go out now to meet Ahaz, you and your son Shir-Jashub, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the fuller field. This is an exact geographic location that was known to everybody and anybody who was living around Jerusalem. And say to him, take care and be calm, have no fear, do not be faint-hearted, because of these two stubs of smoldering firebrands, on account of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram and the son of Remaliah. So what he's saying is, these two guys, Rezin and Pekah, this alliance of the Syrians with the Israelites of the northern kingdom, he's saying to Isaiah to say to Ahaz, don't be afraid. All they are is two stubs of smoldering firebrands. The way Ahaz is looking at them is that they're bright burning torches. No, God says, I'm already taking care of the problem. So you don't need to worry about them. But he is worried about them. And he's so worried that he's going to be the one who sends off to Assyria to have them come into the land and take care of the problem. And they do take care of that problem. The only problem is that they continue right on into Judah and try to take Judah off into Assyrian captivity also. Verse 5, because Aram, that's Syria, with Ephraim, that's the northern kingdom of Israel, and the son of Remaliah, has planned evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and terrorize it, and make for ourselves a breach in its walls, and set up the son of Tabeel as king in the midst of it. So Isaiah receives this message from God, and then Isaiah is going to reveal this message to Ahaz. All the information that he really needs. God, of course, is the best spy that one could have, because he knows exactly what's going on in the hearts of these individuals. Verse 7, thus says the Lord God, it shall not stand, nor shall it come to pass. What he says is, they want to take Jerusalem, they want to make a breach in the wall, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to let it happen. That's what they want to do. He's not talking about Assyria. He's talking about northern kingdom of Israel and the nation of Syria. Verse 8, for the head of Aram is Damascus, that's the capital city, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, that's the king. Now within another 65 years, Ephraim will be shattered, so is no longer a people. That's just a parenthetical statement that's placed there to note even the future of the northern kingdom of Israel. It's not going to last much longer. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah, and that's Pekah. If you will not believe, you surely shall not last. Now what he's noting right here is a necessary faith on the part of Ahaz. This is all information that God's giving to Isaiah. He takes his son with him. He goes to this place that is well known, and there's where Ahaz is going to be. He doesn't have to jump the White House fence and make a run for the front door that's unlocked. You'd think people in Washington would know better than that. Leave their front door unlocked. But anyway, and it's, by the way, by the next day it was locked. Verse 10, then the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, ask a sign for yourself from the Lord your God. In other words, he's speaking through Isaiah, and Isaiah is saying, this is God. God has told me that to So you need to ask a sign for yourself from the Lord your God. Make it deep as Sheol, and that's, of course, using it in the sense of the unknown, the place of the unknown. Make it as deep as Sheol, or high as heaven. In other words, from those two extremes, those are the two extremes, upper and lower extremes, heaven and Sheol. But Ahaz said, verse 12, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord. That's a terrible response. When God says, test me, you better test me. Now, if God says, don't test me, then you better not test me. But here God is saying, test me. Ask a sign. Now, Ahaz would have known about signs. The Jews were very, very knowledgeable concerning their history. We can go back into the Judges, and we remember Gideon being the one who was always asking for a sign, and God always granted him a sign. So there's no problem with asking a sign for God, or from God.
How many times has God said test me? I know I can think of Malachi where he told to test me.
Test me now in this, concerning the offering.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. But Ahaz says in a very, we don't know if it's a prideful way or if it's he's an evil king. He doesn't want to be beholding to God. What he's probably saying in his mind, I've already taken care of the problem. We got the Assyrians come into the land. Well, that's not an answer to the problem. The Assyrians will come into the land. So he says, no, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord. Then he said, listen now, O house of David. This would be Isaiah speaking for God. Listen now, O house of David. That's Ahaz. Is it too slight a thing for you to try the patience of men, that you will try the patience of my God as well? So, because he's an evil king, he's already trying the patience of his people. So, you consider it so slight a thing, you're already testing or trying the patience of men. Now you're going to try the patience of God as well. Therefore, the Lord himself, verse 14, will give you a sign. Behold an Almah, A-L-M-A-H. Behold an Almah. It's translated young woman. A young woman of marriageable age. Young woman of marriageable age within this culture would be a young woman anywhere between the ages of 10 and 13. For those of you who have daughters, the shotgun would come out if anyone trying to date a daughter of yours between the age of 10 and 13.
How did you spell Alma?
A-L-M-A-H. So a young woman of marriageable age will be with child. The word virgin is a bad translation. If it was virgin, it would be the Hebrew word Bethula. Bethula. B-E-T-H-U-L-A-H. Bethula. But it's not that word.
I really don't want to be contentious about this. I just want to ask, what kind of historical evidence do we have that a 10 to 13-year-old girl was being married at that time?
Just in the writings of the Jews of the time, nothing within the text. So it would be just historical evidence. That as soon as they would reach a period where they would be able to bear children, then they would be considered to be and of course that's easily determined. And I'm not going to that cycle, but it is a cycle. And that would be determined in most cultures where the girls were not of any value until they were married off and a dowry was paid. So looking at it from a financial standpoint, that would be the time of marriageable age. I mean that all young women were married off at that age, but that is marriageable age.
Can you word again?
Bethula, B-E-T-H-U-L-A-H. So be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. He will eat curds and honey. At the time he knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. So there will be a time between the time that he is born and the time he has reached an age of accountability. That's age of accountability. He knows enough to refuse. Well, it's not even accountability, because a child will learn to refuse evil and choose good even before an age of accountability. So it's a very early age, and it's the time when he will be eating curds and honey. So he'll be off of breast milk, he'll be on solid food at this time. And that's probably a better indication of the time rather than refusing evil and choosing good. And among ancients, some women would nurse their children for a very long period of time, even after they were up walking and talking. So he says, for before the boy will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings you dread will be forsaken. Well, that's Rezin and Pekah. Well, Rezin and Pekah, that's the king of Syria and the king of Israel. This is a message to the king of Judah. This is the primary prophecy of Isaiah 7. This is a dual fulfillment prophecy. You've already recognized it with Matthew 1:23, where the word young woman is not used, but the word virgin is used in Matthew 1:23. But the translators, the New American Standard Version, decided to use virgin because it is a focus fulfillment prophecy in Matthew 1:23. But it would have been better had they left it young woman.
You know, I've always kind of wondered about this.
Uh-huh.
If the context is talking about what's going to happen,
Yep.
I guess I really just don't understand how you could have something be fulfilled twice. I mean, he is talking about one thing. And that's what's going to happen in this context to the people that are looking
He's actually talking about two women. This has no meaning whatsoever to Ahaz if it's only found in Matthew 1:23. But contextually, we're going to go deeper and deeper, and it's going to be seen as having meaning for Ahaz. The whole purpose of the prophecy for Ahaz is, before this child reaches a certain age, then that problem is going to be taken care of. It's used in the secondary sense for us, but is the primary sense in Matthew 1:23. So that's why it's a beautiful prophecy.
I guess my question is does Isaiah realize this?
Doesn't have to.
Or are we looking back saying, well, we're going to apply that to this?
That's exactly what you'll find many times within the New Testament is an inspired application of an Old Testament passage that becomes messianic or becomes something that is referring to that particular time.
Okay.
When we're in Joel, the second chapter, you remember, we didn't find any present application for that particular time. That all seems to be found again in Acts, the second chapter, with the preaching of Peter. But this one is different. This one has an application here in the time of Ahaz, has an application also in the time of Jesus for the virgin birth. So the inspired writer is told to use this for the virgin birth, and to not insert young woman, but to insert the word for virgin within the Greek. So we continue on. It says, the two kings you dread will be forsaken. So there's the immediate context. Verse 17, the Lord will bring on you, on your people, and on your father's house such days as have never come since the day that Ephraim separated from Judah, the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria is going to come. So here's a condemnation in verse 17 against Ahaz for even bringing up the king of Assyria. And God says, since you decided to go in that direction, you condemned yourself by not going to me, but I'm going to allow and even encourage the king of Assyria to come into the land. And it will come about in that day that the Lord will whistle for the fly, that's Assyria, that is in the remotest part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. This Assyrian empire, by the way, would extend all the way down into Egypt, eventually. And they will all come and settle on the steep ravines, on the ledges of the cliffs, on all the thorn bushes and all the watering places. In that day the Lord will shave with a razor hired from the regions beyond the Euphrates, that is, with the king. Now, it's not saying that the Lord shaves himself. He says, I'm going to shave you. Now, of what effect is shaving Ahaz or shaving Judah have upon the people? Think about it.
Makes them clean.
Think about it. God says, I'm going to bring a razor. The razor is going to be Assyria. Assyria is going to come in and shave your head. What does that do for the women?
It humiliates them.
Humiliation. What does it do for the men?
Humiliates them.
Same thing. So he says, I'm going to humiliate you by using my razor on you, and my razor is Assyria.
Well, since you guys are so hesitant, I'll use that on a Kiska.
Because
Got
you
it now.
certainly forget this, my men. So in that day the Lord will shave with a razor hired from the regions beyond the Euphrates. And see, Assyria was hired by Ahaz. Okay, Ahaz, you did it. I'm going to use them. That is, with the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the legs. It will also remove the beard. I mean, he's just going to shave all the hair off. Now it will come about in that day that a man may keep alive a heifer and a pair of sheep. And it will happen that because of the abundance of the milk produced, he will eat curds. For everyone that is left within the land will eat curds and honey. And it will come about in that day that every place where there used to be 1,000 vines, valued at 1,000 shekels of silver, become briars and thorns. This is a devastation that's coming as a result of God's razor. People will come here with bows and arrows because all the land will be briars and thorns. And as for all the hills which used to be cultivated with the hoe, you will not go there for fear of briars and thorns, but they will become a place for pasturing oxen and for sheep to trample. So Ahaz has turned down the ability to ask a sign from God, and God has said, I'm going to give you a sign anyway. Whether you like it or not, I'm going to give you a sign. And the sign is this time period, the time period that we've normally seen between the birth of a child and the time when they would understand the difference between right and wrong, and they'd be eating curds and honey. They'd be on solid food. Now, I'm not sure exactly what time frame that would be, but I would think that you're probably looking at least 3 or 4 years at the most. So within that time period, God says he's going to take care of all this. Now, chapter 8 is a continuation of chapter 7. Really, it's a bad chapter break right here. Then the Lord said to me, take for yourself a large tablet and write on it in ordinary letters, swift is the booty, speedy is the prey. Now, that Hebrew word that is found there is the Hebrew word Maharshalahashbaz.
Okay. Bless you.
All right. Maharshalahashbaz. And Maharshalahashbaz, look down in verse 3, is going to be the name of this second son. So Shir Jashub is the first son. Mahar Shalahashbaz is the name of the second son. Now it's all done because this is prophecy for Judah. And I will take to myself faithful witnesses for testimony, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. So I approached the prophetess, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. Then the Lord said to me, name him Mahar Shalahashbaz. That very same name, that very same thing that you wrote on the tablet back in verse 1. For before the boy knows how to cry out, my father or my mother. So this is another time frame. Just a continuation of the same time frame.
Developed in chapter 7. Before the boy knows how to cry out, my father or my mother, this is before he's even able to talk. We had earlier the difference, knowing the difference, will know enough to refuse evil and choose good. That's what we saw earlier. And he will eat curds and honey at that time. But now we see that the time frame is changed, not changed, but it's a different way of looking at it. For before the boy knows how to cry out, my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria. So what he's saying is, Ahaz, you called up Assyria. I'm going to use Assyria. Now he's not yet told him of the difficulty that Assyria will give to Judah, especially during the reign of his son Hezekiah. But he says, this is what's going to happen. You wouldn't ask for a sign. You had to rely on the kingdom of Assyria. Okay, well, I'll use Assyria, but he wants Ahaz to know that this is God doing this. And he could have saved himself a lot of trouble if he had just gone to God to begin with. But he wasn't a good king. And he went to a foreign alliance. In verse 5, and again the Lord spoke to me further, saying, inasmuch as these people have rejected the gentle flowing waters of Shiloah. Now Shiloah is the Siloam channel that's in Jerusalem. And the rejection of Shiloah is the rejection of God, the gently flowing waters. You rejected the gently flowing waters as an answer to your problem. You went after that wild beast of Assyria to answer your problem. And rejoice and reason in the son of Remaliah, in other words, those people who have rejected God, that would include the northern kingdom of Israel, and they rejoice and reason in the son of Remaliah, that's the northern kingdom of Israel. Now therefore, behold, the Lord is about to bring on them, that's reason in the son of Remaliah, the strong and abundant waters of the Euphrates. So he's contrasting the abundant waters of the Euphrates, which would be Assyria, with a rejection of the gently flowing waters of Shiloah. So primarily, even though there's a bit of thought there for Ahaz, primarily he's talking about the northern kingdom of Israel, who has completely rejected God. They have put themselves in a civil war situation, Syria and Israel against Judah. And he says, I'm going to bring on them, instead of the gently flowing waters of Shiloah, to be God himself, I'm going to bring on them the strong and abundant waters of the Euphrates. The king of Assyria in all his glory. The word even has been inserted into the English text. He's talking about the king of Assyria in all his glory. and these strong and abundant waters of the Euphrates, because that's the direction that the Assyrians will come in from, is up in the northern part of what is now Iraq, up in the Mosul area, like where a whole bunch of bombing is going on. Up in the area where Nineveh was located. So it will rise up over all of its channels, using the symbolism of the Euphrates, talking actually about Assyria. It will rise up over all its channels and go over all its banks. Then it will sweep on into Judah. So you're bringing a problem upon yourself. Your border doesn't stop this overflowing water. We've seen enough floods in our time to know that you can sandbag all day long, and many, many, many times it will not stop it. Have you ever seen what it does when it gets into the sewer system? And of course, water reaches its level wherever it's flowing, reaches a particular level, and if that level is 20 feet higher than the manhole cover in the middle of the street, guess what's going to happen to the manhole cover? You're going to have a fountain that's 20 feet high. That's the constant pressure of water. Water is just a mighty, mighty force, and God knows that. He notes all of this. So it'll sweep on into Judah, it will overflow and pass through. It will reach even to the neck. So you'll not be completely consumed in Judah. You can still breathe if water doesn't get above your head. Reach even to the neck. It's scary. And the spread of its wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. Now, Emmanuel means what? God's with us. What were the people of Judah saying? God is with us. So he uses that in almost a sarcastic tone when he says, and the spread of its wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. You call yourselves the people of God. What are you doing with a king who goes to the king of Assyria to help break a siege that's being brought upon him by Judah and the northern kingdom, by Syria and the northern kingdom of Israel? Oh, Emmanuel. And you call yourselves the people of God? So that's the context, and that's where the chapter break should have taken place. But that's the context of Isaiah 7. It's actually Isaiah 7 down through chapter 8, verse 8. Now, we'll talk more about Isaiah's sons. And so it's quite possible when you're looking, go back to chapter 7, young woman, feeble child, and bear a son. Go from verse 14 down to chapter 8 and verse 3. So I approached the prophetess, she conceived and gave birth to a son. Then the Lord said to me, name him Maher-shalal-hash-baz. And then go from 8:3 over to verse 4. For before the boy, that's Maher-shalal-hash-baz, knows how to cry out, my father or my mother, who dwelt in Damascus, flows to Samaria, be carried away before the king of Assyria. That's the answer that Ahaz wants, but he doesn't realize what he's done to Judah in the process. So when you're looking at the child that is born, and even though the child is called Emmanuel, what we're looking at is this second son of Isaiah in chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. That's the immediate fulfillment. But that's not the primary fulfillment for us. Matthew 1:23 is the primary fulfillment for us because Matthew, as an inspired writer, takes this section of Isaiah, what we call Isaiah 7 verse 14, and has application for the virgin birth. And it just takes the changing of one word to make it that. So we're not looking at a virgin birth in Isaiah 7. We are looking at a virgin birth in Matthew 1. So it becomes a beautiful covenant. And it's a perfect example of that. Anyone have any questions? You had all of that in Matthew, didn't you?
Yes, we did.
Pardon me?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Because there are some who don't want Isaiah 7:14 to say anything other than virgin, but it's not in the text. If it's not in the text, then I don't believe the Lord meant it to be considered, even though it is repeated in Matthew 1:23. So that all goes along with Ahaz seeking help from Assyria, and that was bad news back in 2 Kings 16, verses 7 and 8. So, as we're moving on the outline, we know that Assyria invades Syria. We'll go back to 2 Kings 16, verse 9. Getting back into the Old Testament text. And we'll come back and cover more of Isaiah. 2 Kings 16, verse 9. Says, so the king of Assyria listened to him. He listened to Ahaz. You go back to verse 7 of 2 Kings 16. Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am your servant. He should have been saying that to who? God. And your son, to God. Come up and deliver me from the hand of the king of Aram, to God. And from the hand of the king of Israel, to God, who are rising up against me. And Ahaz took all the silver and gold. Wouldn't have had to do that with God. It belongs to God anyway. You don't have to give him back his gold and silver. That was found in the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, sent a present to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria listened to him. And the king of Assyria went up against Damascus and captured it. That would be the end of the Syrian problem. And carried the people of it away in exile to Kir, and put Rezin to death. Rezin was the king of Syria at the time. Then in verse 10, now King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser. He's already captured Damascus. It's now in Assyrian hands. And saw the altar. I mean, this is faithless Ahaz, ungodly king. And saw the altar. And this is the wickedness of Ahaz. He goes up there to pay tribute, saw the altar which was at Damascus, and King Ahaz sent to Urijah the priest the pattern of the altar and its model according to all its workmanship. So Urijah the priest built an altar according to all that King Ahaz had sent from Damascus. Thus Urijah the priest made it before the coming of King Ahaz from Damascus. So he sends back the pattern of this idolatrous altar. It says, I want this altar. I want an altar just like this, you know. Can't be satisfied with the altar that's found, the altar of burnt offering that's found with the temple. Oh, that's just an old rustic. I want the one that has the bells and whistles on it. Got a better cruise control than this one. And verse 12, and when the king came from Damascus, the king saw the altar. Then the king approached the altar and went up to it and burned his burnt offering. Oh, this is going to be acceptable to God? And his meal offering, and poured his libation, and sprinkled the blood of his peace offering on the altar. And the bronze altar, which was before the Lord, this is the proper, neglected altar. And the bronze altar was before the Lord. He brought from the front of the house, from between his altar and the house of the Lord, and he put it on the north side of his altar. Then King Ahaz commanded Urijah the priest, saying, upon the great altar, in other words, my altar, burn the morning burnt offering, and the evening meal offering, and the king's burnt offering, and his meal offering, with the burnt offering of all the people of the land, and their meal offering, and their libations, and sprinkle on it all the blood of the burnt offering, and all the blood of the sacrifice. But the bronze altar, the one that's supposed to be used for that, shall be for me to inquire by. I have no idea what he was going to do. He's going to call upon that original altar in some magical way. But my great altar is the one you're going to use all the time. And it's almost like he's saying, the only way you can get to God is through me. See the position he's placing himself in? So no wonder he's faithless Ahaz. So and then verse 17, then King Ahaz cut off the borders of the stands and removed the laver from them. He also took down the sea. That's the basin, the large basins used to wash the sacrifices before they're cut up and put on the altar of burnt offering, the brazen laver. He also took down the sea, that's the laver itself, from the bronze oxen which were under it, and put it on a pavement of stone, and the covered way for the Sabbath, which they built in the house, and the outer entry of the king he removed from the house of the Lord, because of the king of Assyria. That's how much influence the king of Assyria has on Ahaz. Now, go over to 2 Chronicles 28. 2 Chronicles 28. Look at verses 22 through 25. It's virtually the same thing, but worded in an interesting fashion. It says, now in the time of his distress, this same King Ahaz became yet more unfaithful to the Lord. See, it expands upon the original text that we noted in 2 Kings 16. For he sacrificed to the gods of Damascus. Why would you do that? Which had defeated him, and said, because the gods of the kings of Aram helped them, I will sacrifice to them that they may help me. But they became the downfall of him and all Israel. Moreover, when Ahaz gathered together the utensils of the house of God, he cut the utensils of the house of God in pieces. He closed the doors of the house of the Lord, made altars for himself in every corner of Jerusalem. Every city of Judah he made high places to burn incense to other gods, and provoked the Lord, the God of his fathers, to anger. Do you really want to provoke God to anger? Now, it's during this reign and this is still during the reign of Jotham. Jotham is still alive. Ahaz is doing all this because in 2 Kings 16, verse 36, no, can't be 2 Kings 16, 36. 1536. In 1536, Jotham dies, Now the rest of the acts of Jotham, all he did, are not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. And then in verse 38, Jotham slept with his fathers, was buried with his father in the city of David, his father. Ahaz, his son, became king, means he became sole king. This was a co-regency up to this point. So the points to remember in Jotham's reign, he was a good king, excellent warrior, great builder. But during the time of the last few years of his life, he was, about 4 years of his life, he allowed Ahaz to get in there and reign. Or 3 years it is. He was a co-regent 3 years. He was a good king, excellent warrior, great builder. That was Jotham. But now you come down to Ahaz. Ahaz comes to the throne. 2 Kings 16 or 15, verse 38b. Ahaz, his son, became king in his place. And we're about to come down to the last king of Israel. If you look at your syllabus, you'll note, this is page 62, Assyria invades Israel. Pekah dies, 2 Kings 15, verses 31 and 30. The rest of the acts of Pekah and all they did, behold, they're written in the books of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. And then in verse 30 it says, and Hosea the son of Elah, this will be the last king, Hosea the son of Elah made a conspiracy against Pekah, the son of Remaliah, and struck him and put him to death, and became king in his place in the 20th year of Jotham the son of Uzziah. So he slew Pekahiah, that's Pekah, and he made an alliance with reason against Judah, which all came to an end. So you see at the bottom of the page, we have the beginning of Hosea. He's only going to reign for 9 years. The Assyrians are in the land. Ahaz is king of Judah. Then we come to page 63 of the syllabus. The 12th year of Ahaz is the same as the 20th year of Jotham. So we're looking at Hosea. He comes to the throne, 2 Kings 17, verse 1. The 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hosea the son of Elah became king over Israel and Samaria, reigned 9 years. His character is found in verse 2. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, only not as the kings of Israel who were before him. This is the only time that you have an indication that he doesn't sin after the sin of Jeroboam the son of Nebat. It's too little, too late. So maybe it's an attempt to get back to God. But it's during this time, in the 3rd year of Hosea, that we find Hezekiah, we find Ahaz dying. You go back to 2 Kings 16, this is still on that page of the syllabus, page 63. 2 Kings 16, look at the latter part of verse 2. He did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his father David had done. This is Ahaz. Verse 3, but he walked away the kings of Israel, and even made his son pass through the fire. Fortunately, that was not Hezekiah. According to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had driven out from before the sons of Israel. In verse 4, he sacrificed burnt incense on the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree. And it was all idolatry, remember? It got all enthralled with the altar that he saw in Damascus. This is where we studied Isaiah 7. And then in 2 Kings 16 and verse 19, the rest of the acts of Ahaz which he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Verse 20 says, so Ahaz slept with his fathers with grave, and his father in the city of David, and his son Hezekiah reigned in his place. So he's noted as a king of Israel. We didn't see that, but that's noted within the text. That was a section in 2 Chronicles. He's likened unto a king of Israel. Can you imagine being a king of Judah, being in the lineage of David? And every time anybody refers to you, he says, oh, he might as well be a king of Israel. He's just like one of them. But he's the one that seeks help from Assyria. And he's evil. And so, enough with the bad news. Now we're coming to a good king. And that's going to be Hezekiah. He's the son of Ahaz. He has a son by the name of Manasseh. And Manasseh is the most apostate king of Judah. He reigned for 55 years, and he's wicked.
Well, Hezekiah has a wicked father, then he has a wicked son.
Yep.
But he's good, isn't it?
How does that work? Yep. Have you got that figured out?
No?
No, Ezekiel 18 is all about that.
Yeah, that's right. The father and the son, one is not responsible for the other's sins. So that's the individuality, the individual's responsibility for sin. But just think about it for a minute. Put your critical thinking caps on. Why would you, as a good father, have an evil son, or as a good son have an evil father?
Neglect.
Well, you would raise your kid probably the same way your dad raised you, maybe, even though you were able to kind of get away from.
Yeah, but you would think that if you were a good king like Hezekiah, you'd have a good son by the name of Manasseh, because you would have been a good king.
Maybe he neglected his son.
You're on the right track. Why would a son be neglected by the father?
He was zealous for God.
You what?
He was zealous for God, but forgot his own family. Some guys do that.
He's too busy being king.
Okay, too busy being king. What else?
Go ahead, Abraham. Was the son of Hezekiah that took rule, was he the firstborn?
Would what now?
Well, the king that took place after Hezekiah, was he the firstborn or the secondborn? Because I know
Well,
the
generally
firstborn
they were
was
firstborn. It doesn't always say that, but usually that's the case. That's primogeniture, and that means that it's a firstborn receives the inheritance, so the firstborn would be the king in line. But why would a good king end up with an evil son
Well, Paul
and
tells,
have ended up with an evil father?
Paul tells us that bad company corrupts good character, so it's also possible that, with parental neglect, that he could have fallen into bad company, and those who, they have money, they have power, so when the vices that money and wealth give access to, so.
The answer that's the obvious answer goes back to the time of David.
I was going to say maybe example, because Hezekiah once didn't put his trust in God. When the Assyrians came in, he gave them the treasury from the temple instead of trusting in God, and that might have done something right there to the character of his son, thinking, oh well, he didn't trust in God, so I'm not going to trust in God.
But if you're a good father, why is it that your son would turn out to be evil?
Look,
Ezekiel 18.
well, we talked about it, Scott just mentioned one of them.
Yeah.
I wasn't listening. You way over there, bro. That's my bad. Artillery hearing.
Do you remember the lineage of David, the sons that are born to David?
Three of them.
Do you remember any
Solomon.
of those sons? Who is the son that becomes king after David?
Solomon.
But he's not the next in line.
Absalom.
But Absalom's been hanging around in an oak tree with a spear stuck in him.
That was because he rebelled against his father, because he fell down the wrong path.
Who has the influence over Solomon?
His mother.
Ah, now we come to the real answer.
Women.
Obviously, the king has no time for his children. And having no time for your children means that they're going to go the way of someone else's influence. And so it's the influence of the one who is involved in childbearing. And in so many of these cases, we've got the woman, the mother of that particular child. Now you remember that Bathsheba is really a designing woman. She's really going after the throne. And she will circumvent, actually it comes down, it should have been the son that was born to David by Abigail. That would have been the next in line after you remove all the ones that were removed through death. He would have been the next one, but nothing is ever said about him. But it comes down to being Solomon. And it's Bathsheba. She is the one. She's maneuvering. And you'll see a lot of that maneuvering with her and David and getting these promises for her son Solomon. So what we're probably looking at right here is a situation where, and this is a good example for us to take hold of, for those of us who are fathers, that your children need you. I'm already getting some indications that I'm going to have to talk to the whole student body. I'm getting some indications from some wives who are being neglected among the students here in school because they aren't spending any time with their wives, because they think God's mission for them in studying 24 hours a day, or maybe 26 hours a day, I don't know, it takes precedence over their marriage relationship. And that's not going to work. You're going to lose children, you're going to lose a wife, you're going to lose your marriage, and then your ministry will be not very effective. And that's what we've got right here. We've got Ahaz, who obviously, going off on his own self-willed way, seemingly did not have an influence on Hezekiah, which was good, which means that probably the one who was involved in child-rearing, who would have been Hezekiah's mother would have had a great influence on him, and her influence upon him was to be a good individual who turned out to be a good king. However, Hezekiah should have learned from that. You remember Eli's sons, and you remember Samuel's sons. You remember those relationships where for some reason the father influence just wasn't there. And wasn't it a shame that Eli, whose impression was primarily in child rearing, was gained from Eli? Eli did a terrible job with his sons, and so when Samuel came along, he did a terrible job with his sons. How many families have you ever been around where this same idea of child rearing is just perpetuated from generation to generation? Where you've got a bad family situation, and then the kids go on and they've got a bad family situation, and then the kids go on and they've got a bad family situation. I know of a particular situation where a grandmother bore a child out of wedlock. Her daughter bore a child out of wedlock. Her daughter bore a child out of wedlock. And her daughter bore a child out of wedlock. Now talk about perpetuating something that was absolutely wrong. And you almost wonder, well, was that in the genes?
How did that happen to take place? But the influence upon the child in that child education time period is not done by the king. The king's too busy. Now, here's the example for us. The king is too busy. He's out doing meetings and lectures and Bible studies and all of that. And he's not taking care of his kids. And so when his kids go off, then he says, oh, it's not my fault. He'll almost want to blame God. That's God's fault. Because God commanded me to go into all the world and be a preacher and took up all my time. Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute. In most of these instances, didn't you have your wife and children before you went off into ministry? Don't you have a responsibility to them? Didn't they come first? So, when you're in school and when you're out in ministry, you've always got to take care of your family. And you can fill up all your time with Bible studies. You can convert all sorts of individuals in your lifetime and still lose your family. And there are guys who have come through this school that I know who are divorced and have lost their families. Even though they went through and studied all the same things you've studied. It's like there's a bit of cast iron up there. And all of that we talked about families just went boing, boing. So, it's a good example for us. So when we see Ahaz as a wicked king, probably has no influence whatsoever on his son Hezekiah. It's the mother, more than likely. And the educators, because the children have been educated by educators that have been brought in to the palace. And then when Hezekiah has a son, Manasseh, he doesn't do right by Manasseh. And so it's the influence of the mother or the educators. And in this country, we tend to have children who are just sort of throwaway children, children who are out late at night, and we have children rearing children. Do you realize that? Children rearing children. And children don't make good parents. Really. So we've got our own unique problem in this country. So we come down to Hezekiah. Hezekiah is going to reign for 29 years, and he is going to be a good king, and that's where we're going to stop for today.